Hello, my name is Eric. Welcome back to the Game Devlog series. Hopefully I don't sound too bad. I'm currently recovering from a small cold that left me with headaches and fatigue for a few days. In episode 1, I completed work on the first draft of my terrain brush engine. Today's focus was improving the usability of my toolset Amethyst and implementing that terrain brush engine into the toolset. A lot of this stuff isn't very flashy or interesting, so I've kind of skipped over a lot of the mundane stuff as to not kill you of boredom. I started this process with a slight overhaul of the UI engine that I built for Amethyst, called Flow. This engine works by creating panels and nesting other elements such as text inputs, buttons, or other panels into those panels. Each element before this overhaul required an explicit XY position relative to either the screen or its parent element. While this worked and accomplished what it needed to, it would have been incredibly tedious to have had to manually manage the positions of each individual element. So I decided to introduce a new system into the library that allows for dynamically laid out content. This feature is very reminiscent of flexboxes in CSS. You provide a parent element a flow attribute of either horizontal or vertical, which is analogous to flexbox's row or column respectively. This will override the child element's X or Y values and will lay out content adjacent to others. This is great for the sidebar of my editor because different objects will have different amounts of attributes to edit, and without a feature like this, the sidebar would most likely have had huge gaps of space or a very janky and unreliable layout process. After this, most of my time was spent updating the existing UI layouts to this new system, which is as tedious as perfecting the CSS for your web page, so I've skipped most of that for this video. I was originally going to cap this episode at just the UI, but I felt that wasn't interesting nor important enough to require its own episode, so I pushed on and started working on implementing the tile brushes that I made in episode 1. This required a lot of internal tweaking to the engine because up until this point, Amethyst was only expecting world objects. I changed the layout of the left sidebar, which is called the Explorer, to handle both world objects and tile maps. I introduced a singleton class called Editor that handles the state of what type of stuff the editor is currently being asked to edit. This was important because it ensures that 1, if you click the hitbox of an object while editing a tile map, you won't suddenly stop editing that tiled map, and 2, the sidebar will render the properties for the right kind of content. I later programmed a custom state class that allows you to chain functions together to run when that state is changed to something else. This removed a lot of duplicate code that was written to help manage the UI elements. The biggest problem I had while implementing the tile map class was figuring out how big each tile map should be in pixels. Since canvases are technically just big textures that you can draw to, having 1000 by 1000 tiles isn't really feasible since that'd be asking the editor to manipulate a 16,000 by 16,000 pixel image or bigger. I found this out the hard way when I first got the tile brushes integrated. I had a lot of memory spikes that almost crashed my computer on a few occasions. By shrinking the size of the canvas to a max of about 2,000 to 3,000 pixels square, the memory is manageable. This translates to about 150 or 200 square tiles. If that's not enough room, the map designer could use a separate layer and use either trees or another tile brush to hide the seam. I do not see any memory issues being present in the end game though. The imported tile maps will be static, and therefore will not need the capability to re-render themselves to show an incoming change. This essentially makes them fancy PNG pictures that we create using the editor. Next came saving and loading these world files. This required a couple of slight tweaks to my sprite and tile brush class to accept a string representing the path to an image rather than an image itself. That way, when the object was serialized, I'd then have the string to load that image later, rather than having to save an encoded image, which is a lot more space. The serializer I use is quite smart, and likes to cut down on space where it can. For example, I was worried that the tile maps were going to take up a lot of space since each tile has its own brush attribute, which is a reference to an instance of the tile brush class. However, instead of saving every tile with the serialized tile brush data, the serializer will save it once, and then every tile after that will just point to that first tile's brush. It's a bit confusing to explain, so here's a screenshot of the data that was saved. If it still doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. The serialized world data is then sent through a library I found called libdeflate, which essentially zips the file and compresses by a factor of about 10. Loading is basically the same thing, just in reverse. The editor uncompresses the file, loads that string as a table, and then loops through the subtables and creates new instances of the classes that subtable pertains to. I didn't end up recording the process of building the UI elements for the save load dialog because it's pretty boring. That's basically it for this episode. I'd like to keep these videos somewhat short and entertaining. There will probably be a lot of off-video work on this editor, since at this point most of the major features have been implemented and now it's about polish. I'm not sure what the next episode will be about. I know that I have to build a system that will load this information into a gameplay-ready environment rather than an editor-ready one. This may get its own episode. If not, then the next episode might not be for a couple weeks. I move back into university in less than 2 weeks, and it will most likely take up a lot of my time in the coming days. If there's anything you'd like to see more of, let me know in the comments. Like I've said previously, I recorded a lot of content that didn't end up in this video for the sake of brevity. If this is something that you're actually interested in seeing, I'm not against putting it in the video. I've just cut them out since I'm not sure how thorough you'd like for me to be in my explanations. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.